So the title of the chapter is Frank. The first patient I was assigned to was a 55-year-old gentleman named Frank, only he pronounced it Frank with a French accent. I distinctly knew his real name was Frank and had to be from the north end of Boston, very Italian. But I let him think I believed he was Frank from Paris. Didn't he know his dripping gold chains were a dead giveaway? Anyway, Frank had had a heart attack, damaged one of his coronary arteries, and was now in the healing process. He had already been in the hospital a week, was ready for discharge when he developed chest pain again, and he was sent to the coronary care unit where the doctors ruled out another heart attack and sent him back to the regular medical floor. That's where I came in. I was his student nurse until discharge. I was instructed to help with his personal care, take his vital signs, and follow up on all other doctor's orders under my instructor's supervision. The first 2 days went well. I made his bed, took his blood pressure every 2 hours, gave him a back rub, offered support. "This is a breeze," I said to my roommate Tricia. "He's a nice guy, easy to take care of." But the next day, Frank was waiting for me, said he didn't feel well, was too tired to wash up. I said to myself, not according to the report I received. They said everything was fine, he slept all night. I said, I will take your vital signs, but I'm going to leave. And he said, no, just get a basin and I'll wash up. So I proceeded with the daily routine, placed the basin with hot soapy water in front of him with the face cloth and towel, and started to leave the room. He called to me, "Katie, I really need help. Please wash me." He proceeded to hand me the face cloth, pulled down the sheet where he was totally naked. He pointed and said, "Please wash me." I started to stutter. For Frank, I need to ask my instructor, as I backed out of the room, turning totally red. I caught my instructor before she headed into another patient's room and told her the story. "Do you think he's capable of washing himself?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I don't want to go near him." She came back in the room with me, retook his vital signs, and pronounced him healthy to wash his own groin. I think after that, I was really, boy, I didn't run. I guess I was just meant to be a nurse, because I remember him to this day. And believe me, there's been many Franks. But as you, grow with being a nurse, it's second nature almost. So anyways, that was my first experience, and I went year by year. And as I said, I started in 1969, and then all of a sudden I got to 1972 and 73, and I totally wanted to skip over those years. I said, da-da-da-da-da, I'm not going to write about those, in my head. I just want to forget it. But I'm a real God person, and God was nudging me. I could feel it. He said, "You can't leave out those years. You cannot do it. Face the facts. You got to talk about this." And the reason I didn't want to was because I got mixed up in drugs, and no rhyme or reason why, nobody to blame but myself. I got in the wrong track with wrong people, and I ended up, my parents got wind of it, and I had to go to a rehab. And, I got out too soon, and I ended up going back to nursing, and I ended up losing my nursing license. And that was the most devastating thing to me in the world. I mean, I was full of shame and remorse. I mean, I hadn't even been a nurse that long, and this happened to me. And, I came close, like I said, to not writing about it, but I'm really, really glad I did, because when I finished the book and I had book signings and radio shows, I had people saying to me, "My daughter's an addict and she's a nurse. What can I do to help her?" Or "My son is," or the nurses themselves. A lot of nurses have injuries. They get addicted to prescription drugs because of back pain, back injuries. And what I could tell them was, and it helped because they saw that I was doing well and that there was hope. So I was so glad about that. But what I could tell them also about the SOP program, which is a substance abuse rehab program through the Division of Nursing. And what that does is the nurses don't have to lose their licenses. They can have them suspended, but they have to be accountable for what they did. And they can't work on the floors or with patients until they are really ready and back on their feet. And I was on the board of that for a while, and it's a wonderful program, because there's 13% of nurses have an addiction. And that doesn't mean you run out now and be worried if you get hospitalized or something. The whole time I worked at Leahy, I only knew one nurse that had a problem. But it's out. I'm glad I did mention it after all. But it was difficult because, you know, all of a sudden I'm writing about it, and it happened so many years before to me that it almost seemed foreign, and I felt like I was writing about another person almost. But I'm glad I did it. So this book went on, and, you know, I talk about HMOs, and I mentioned going into Joe's house twice a day. That's unheard of now. When a patient gets admitted into home care, you immediately find what family member can help. You know, there's a 90-year-old man with a foot ulcer, and they're expected to have a family member help, or the wife that's 85 to change its dressings. I mean, there's something really wrong with this. And I'm not saying that this new health care proposal is the right thing, but, you know, Medicare, I mean, HMOs are really running the show. And even with Medicare, it's becoming more difficult. So, you know, as time went on and I finished the book, but during that time, I thought a whole lot about my parents because they were very, very influential with me in the beginning, and then I went back to school and got my RN. And so my parents were always on my mind when I was writing this, and, you know, what would my father think? Would he be upset that I'm writing about myself, and the family's thrown in there? But, you know, I felt good about it. So I'm just going to read to you. This was my mother. She was 92 when she died. And I'll just read this part to you. Let's find it. The title is End of the Journey. My mom had gotten sick in June of 1998. She was 92 years old and had never been sick a day in her life, and doctors couldn't find a definitive diagnosis for her. She's dwindling, my sister Denise's boyfriend Alan said. Alan's an ER doctor and therefore qualified to know. How often I had heard that term, dwindling, dying, but I didn't want to apply it to my mother. The fact was she was dwindling. She had lost her spirit, her will to live. Her beautiful green eyes were fading, getting closer to death every day. She was at the end of her journey. The beginning of July, she started dragging her left leg. Her doctor had her admitted to a rehab center to try and have a physical therapist work with her. But she developed a blood clot in her leg, and she went downhill from there. She had problems in the rehab, and she suddenly became cold and clammy, and we had to rush her to the emergency room at Leahy Clinic. After a CAT scan, she was diagnosed with cancer, and a tumor was leaning her bowel and caused it to perforate. For 48 hours, I watched the nurses and aides take care of my mom. They rubbed her back, medicated her, turned and positioned her in bed, kept her pain-free. I watched this beautiful Scottish woman who brought me into this world slowly slip from it. Each of her 7 children got to spend alone time with her before she died. I held her hand Sunday morning, heard her bracelet jingle, a familiar sound. It was a bracelet with charms of all her children on it, something she never removed. My mom turned, looked at me, and said, "Am I dying, Kate?" I couldn't reply right away. 30 seconds or so went by. I squeezed her hand and nodded yes. "Are you in any pain, Mama?" I asked, realizing I hadn't called her Mama in over 40 years. She shook her head no. With a look of acceptance, she'd be with my dad soon. My mom died about 4 a.m. the next morning with my sister Irene at her side. She heard her take her last breath. Renee said she held her hand after she died, said the rosary, and tried to absorb the fact our mother had just left this world. I had read somewhere that dying was as easy as walking from one room to another, the passage graceful and easy. So after I finished this book, I had to find a publisher. And during the process of writing this book, I met my wonderful friend Marie Cody, sitting right here. She is a writer for the Daily Times and Chronicle up in our area. And she told me 2 things, well actually 3 things. She told me to join the National Writers Union, buy a big huge thick book called Writer's Market, and take rejection as a grain of salt. And so I did. I followed her advice. I did all 3 of those things. And I had to send out query letters. Query letters are kind of a synopsis of what the book is, and you send them to agents and publishers. So I did that. And, you know, it took forever. It felt like it took forever. I sent out hundreds, and I got hundreds of rejections. And I almost gave up because, you know, it was almost like a full-time job. I could have had an assistant helping me. And I was working. I wasn't working full-time then, but I was still working and had my kids at home. And finally, I got accepted by Four Seasons publisher, and it was a small publishing company in Florida. And I decided to go with that because it was over with. I didn't have to keep sending them out. But what I found, I've learned a lot, what I found is that small publishing companies really don't help with the PR work. I had to do all that myself. And, but it was a wonderful journey. I met wonderful people along the way, nurses, my biggest audience, and just all sorts of different events that I went to, and it was amazing. And it slowed down the summer of 2001, and I said, oh, we'll pick up again in September, and I'll get back out on the road. But then 9/11 happened, and nobody in the world was even thinking of buying books. Book sales went way down. The only thing people were reading were about bin Laden and Taliban and all that.